Exodus chapter 16. And while you're turning there, I think we all know Exodus is the second book of the Bible, but also let's remember that the word Exodus means the departure of a large group of people. So this was an exodus of a large group of people, 600,000 men on foot, now counting women and children, so probably well over 1 million people, and I bet that was a sight to see. You'd have to get in an airplane or helicopter to see that many people move, probably look like ants, moving along, but they were traveling along, following this big, gigantic cloud. It had to have been big as well, I would guess, maybe at least big enough for Moses to see, and probably the people out front, who knows, but I think it had to be visible to all of them. A huge cloud by day, fire by night. And let's review before we get into today's lesson that after the exodus from Egypt, God led them to what we would call through our eyes, a dead-end street, meaning there's no one way in, one way out. But in the eyes of God, there's never a dead-end street, okay? So if you come up to a situation, I'm at a dead end, well, you may be in real life. But if it's difficult and you need a deliverance from it, God is able. He led these people from Egypt right up to a dead-end place where they were hemmed in by the enemy. God had a plan. They went out with military array. They were, had their soldiers all geared up, and I guess with the uniforms or whatever, and marching in step, leading those people. But God knew they weren't spiritually prepared. They had a mental preparedness for war, but not a spiritual preparedness. And so God decided, I'm not going to lead them the shortcut. I'm not going to lead them on the main way. So He led them through the shortcut to a dead end, what appeared a dead end to them, and they became frightened when the Egyptian army came after them and said, what have we done? Let's go bring them people back. So they marched out after them. And this is as if you and I had left the shipwreck island on the west side of the beaches, remember? And instead of going, and we were headed toward Panama City downtown, instead of going across that bridge, used to be called Hathaway Bridge, I guess the new one's replaced it, it's probably named something else. Instead of going across the bay on a bridge, we end up going to St. Andrew's Park there, and it's a peninsula, ends there where all those rocks are, and it's right there in the water, and you're dead end. One way in, one way out. And then the enemy's coming with soldiers, and they blocking off the entrances. What are you going to do? So this was kind of the feeling they had. And you remember the miracle. God provided a miracle. He parted the Red Sea, and they witnessed a great miracle. And they got to be participants in that miracle by marching across the sea on dry land as the waters were apart. And then after this exodus they had another exodus. They left the Red Sea, and then we see in chapter 15, there's 21 verses of celebration. They're all excited. God delivered us again. He's performed a miracle. We're blessed, and they had this song talking about the strength and power of the Lord, and they had dancing as well. And next we saw God led them 3 days into the wilderness to a place called Marah, and there it was place of bitter water. That's what the word Marah meant. So they were in a place, God had led them to a place of need. And the lesson was, God leads us to a place of need when we're following Him from time to time. And this was only 3 days from the celebration. Just down the road from the last miracle is going to be a place of need. So enjoy your miracles, enjoy the deliverance, but God leads His people to places of need. And then we see they left there to a place called Elim in chapter 15. In verse 25, they have a need there. And actually, God purified the water there in Marah. And then in verse 27, He leads them to Elim. And then we find this is a place where they had 12 springs of water and 70 date trees, 70 palm trees. So I assume they had plenty to drink, plenty to eat. And then last week we saw in chapter 16, I had said 75 days after the exodus from Egypt. but it's actually 45, I think is more correct. They leave again, and God leads them after Elim to this place called the Wilderness of Sin, which we referred to the children down front this morning. And here, let's look at verses 2 and 3 to remind us of this story. Just 2 verses here, verses 2 and 3, Exodus chapter 16. The whole congregation of the sons of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. They'd got out of their comfort zone. Now they're unhappy. So they're like a dog growling. They just, unhappy. You ever seen a dog get unhappy, and they start growling? You don't want to mess with them, do you? I had a friend in high school, and they had a dog. I'm trying to remember what the dog's name was. Anyway, you didn't ever, day or night, want to mess with that dog's plate. It was sitting out in the yard. The dog might be 100 feet away from it. But if he saw you messing with his plate, he'd come unglued. He'd start growling, probably grumbling in dog language. Well, these people were grumbling. They had become unhappy. And we see the reason was they were hungry. It says the whole congregation. I'd like to look and see. Are we talking about a few people or is it widespread? The whole congregation was grumbling. And later we see not only were they grumbling against Moses and Aaron, but they were grumbling against God. They didn't mention God, but by grumbling against Moses and Aaron, God's leadership, they were grumbling against God as well. And we just discussed what happened. And God provided food. We'll talk about that here and more in a minute. But I looked at something as I was studying this that I hadn't seen before, and I never heard anybody else mention it. Were they really in need? They were hungry. But is it that they were hungry and needed food or wanted different food? And you say, why in the world do you say that? Well, let's remember how these people left. If we look back when they were leaving Egypt, we can see in chapter 12:31, when that last plague occurred, where everybody was experiencing in Egypt death of the firstborn and death of the firstborn of livestock and people. It says Pharaoh called for Moses and Aaron at night. I'm reading from Exodus 12:31 and 32. And he said, rise up, get up from among my people, both you and the people of Israel. Take your flocks and herds with you. Okay? Now, we looked a little further. Exodus 12:38. It says, as they were leaving, a mixed multitude went up with them, along with flocks and herds, a very large number of livestock. I never had seen that before, had y'all? Never heard it. I've heard the people preaching from this passage forever. I'm sure somebody spotted it, but I just missed the memo on this until God showed it to me. And then even you say, well, they might have run out. I don't think so. We're in chapter 16, and they're belly aching, whining, complaining because they're hungry. All right? But if you look just over in chapter 17, verse 3, they said at another place, after they leave the place, wilderness of sin, why have you brought us up from Egypt to kill us and our children and our livestock with thirst? That reminds me of people just wanting a handout. I can get hungry, but if there's something in the house, I ain't gonna go whining and complaining about it, but not this bunch here. Are you getting the picture? This was one grumbling, complaining, never satisfied. It's like they were spiritually devoid, just complaining. Now, God's patient. He provides for them. He gives them bread from heaven, he calls it. And he also gives them quail. Okay? Now, later on, I thought that he started giving them quail every day. Not so. In this passage, I think it was a one-time event. Later, he gives them quail again. But here, he gave them manna for the first time, but that went on for 40 years. All right? For 40 years. Now, let's look at some things about this provision. First of all, we see the recipients in chapter 16, verse 1, are those who had just been saved. They got saved from the Egyptians. This was salvation, okay? They were his people. They were following him, but evidently they still had some work that needed to be done. They were immature. They spiritually were still lacking. And God's a very patient God, and he still provides for them. Even though they grumbled against him, he still provides for them. And I think, God's patient with us too, right? We haven't arrived. He still puts up with us. But this is a perfect picture of the love and patience of God and how he still provides for needs. Now, I don't doubt that there were probably some of these people, senior adults like myself, maybe some of them were behind a walker, wasn't able to do livestock, maybe some of them were whatever, maybe some of them, Jesus said, you always got the poor with you. So there were probably poor people in this bunch too that didn't have livestock. There was probably some that really needed help. I don't doubt that. But we see God provided for everybody. He provided for everybody. The recipients, the key was, if they hadn't been his people following him, I don't think he'd have provided for them. Now, let's look at the food items, the bread, the meat, okay? The description, we've already given it. In chapter 16, verse 13, it says, quails came up and covered the camp. Me and people. That would have been acres of quails. And I thought quail was like deer. Deer is plural for deer, right? I thought quail was plural for quail, but it's quails, covey of quail. Quails, so I learned something. My grammar still poor. The bread. Layer of dew came up in the morning. It evaporated. And on the surface of the wilderness there was a fine flake thing like frost on the ground, it said. And it might have looked even, I kept thinking of special flakes, flakes. These coriander seeds, it said it looked like coriander seed. Maybe the flakes were shaped, I don't know. But anyway, they named it manna. And it was white. It tasted like wafers with honey. And evidently it was nutritious enough to sustain them for 40 years. That's what they ate. The frequency. Now God said, I'm going to do this. This is going to be a test. He gave them this food, but it was a test. And every morning, chapter 16, verse 21, the first part, this was to happen every morning. And then in verse 26, we see that on the sixth day, they were supposed to gather twice as much because on the Sabbath they weren't supposed to work, right? So, God provides on day one. They go out in the morning and they gather. And on day two, how much do they gather? The amount. Verse 21, as much as they should eat, or would eat, I guess would be correct translation as well. In chapter 16, 17 and 18, some gathered much, some gathered little. Every man gathered as much as he should eat. When I was in college and in high school, I could go by McDonald's back in those days when they had that big breakfast. I'd eat one of them big breakfasts and I'm still hungry. I'd have to go back and get me a sausage and egg biscuit or something. And if I stopped and got a sausage and egg biscuit, that wasn't enough for me. I had to have at least two. In the college days, I just stayed hungry. It took a lot. And some people, some ladies, I guess, could eat just a half one and they full. They done, right? And if you get a big pizza, most ladies are going to eat one or two pieces, but an old boy, he'll eat the whole thing if you don't watch out. He'll eat half the pizza, and not everybody's been through the line yet. Well, however much they needed to eat, God provided. Everybody had what they wanted. Some it was a little bit, some it was a lot, but whatever it took, God provided. There was enough to go around. But here's the requirements. Verse 16, this is what the Lord has commanded. Gather every person as much as he should eat. Let no man leave any of it until morning. In other words, get what you need for today. Don't gather a whole bunch up for tomorrow. I'll give you tomorrow what you're going to need for tomorrow. And some didn't listen. Look at 16 verse 20. But they did not listen, and some left part of it until morning, and it bred worms and became foul. They had a big stink on it. It spoiled, basically. Spoiled quickly, and these worms, I guess maggots, got in there quick. Right? Usually it takes a few days for maggots to appear in anything around here. But this happened fast. And they had disobeyed God. He said, don't eat it. Whatever you get, you eat. Don't leave none of it laying around. And they disobeyed God. Some of them did. And Moses was angry with them. God said, cook all that you want. And then on that 6th day, he said, gather twice as much, because on Sunday, on the Sabbath, our equivalent would be Sunday, which Saturday is really the Sabbath. On the Sabbath, I don't want you out gathering none. There's not going to be any. Get what you're going to get on Sunday. I thought that's a miracle right there. They gathered twice as much and had leftovers on that 6th day, but on days 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, they had leftovers. It became bad. It spoiled, but not on that 6th day. Another miracle. 6 days you should gather, but on the Sabbath there will be none. There won't be none. And guess what? These people are hard-headed. Look, verse 27, came about on the 7th day, on the Sabbath day, that some of the people went out to gather. And guess what? They found none. Can't follow simple commands, How much simpler does God have to get? And in verse 28, we see Moses' response. The Lord said, how long do you refuse to keep my commandments and my instructions? See, the Lord has given you the Sabbath. Therefore, he gives you the bread for 2 days. And on the 6th day, remain every man in his place. Let no man go out of his place on the 7th day. So the people rested on the 7th day. Now, listen, let's talk about some lessons from this. First thing is, in this place of need, or greed, I don't know if it's a place of need or greed, but in this place where there was hunger, God only provided what they needed on a daily basis. Of course, except the 6th day. And he told them in advance. They had no reason to worry about the need for food for tomorrow. No need. I thought about Jesus and what he had taught us in the book of Matthew in the New Testament. He said in Matthew 6:34, let me turn to it. I don't want to misquote it. I'll just read it instead of trying to quote it. Matthew 6:34, Jesus said, so do not worry about tomorrow. Tomorrow will take care for itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. He said, if you're concerned about things that you're going to need, don't worry about tomorrow. Just worry about right now, today. But he said, if you'll seek God, you'll have what you need today. And when tomorrow rolls around, then worry about tomorrow. I thought this is a perfect picture of what Jesus was talking about back here in the Old Testament. He provided for them what they needed Monday morning for Monday. Now, they would run out before Tuesday rolled around, but he didn't want them said, oh man, what am I going to do about Tuesday? I'm running out of food for Monday. I sure hope God comes through. And on Tuesday, guess what? God came through. He provided for them what they needed on Tuesday. And that's just what Jesus taught his disciples in the New Testament. Today, let God provide for you today. Don't worry about tomorrow. Just you're not alive tomorrow yet. You're alive today. You can't go back and redo yesterday. It's gone. It's always today. It's never tomorrow. It's always right now. Anybody ever stepped over into tomorrow and then came back to today? Can't be done. If you went back to yesterday and fixed some things that you messed up on and came back to today, you can't do that. It's always right now, isn't it? No wonder God said to Moses in the beginning of this thing, I am who I am. I am is my name. Not I was who I was. Not I will be who I will be. I am. He's concerned about right now today. So concern yourself about right now today. If you got everything you need right now today, don't worry about tomorrow. God is going to help you when tomorrow rolls around. God provided for Israel in Exodus 16 what they needed. For those people who were like the children of Israel, let's remember now two very important things that's part of this we can't ignore. They were the people of God and they were following God. Either one of those was absent, either of those parts, I think they probably have some reason to start worrying. Long as you're God's person, you've been born again through Jesus Christ, you're following Him, don't worry about tomorrow. Have you got everything you need today? Then don't worry about tomorrow. Just keep following God. Keep being his person, his boy, his girl, his man, his woman. When tomorrow rolls around, you still following, you still belong to him. He's going to provide. If the nation of the United States of America goes through a food shortage, the nation of God will be provided for. Some are predicting fuel shortages and food shortages. Listen, that's a different government. We don't live here. We're aliens. Our citizenship is in heaven. We operate under a supreme government, the government of God. All these other governments, the Bible teaches, rest upon his shoulders. He can control, and he is in control of every strand of government throughout, not just this country, but through the whole world. And I'm confident, we're probably going to face some changes, and it looks like it's shaping right up to me for that time of tribulation, for that one world government, one monetary system, the mark of the beast. Everything that's happening right now, no matter how slow it takes or how fast it happens, it's all under God's control. He's got it right where he wants it. He's shaping it up to where when Jesus came the first time as a baby, this time he's going to wrap things up, but all these things must come to pass. And then we'll end up in heaven and we'll be better than we've ever been. Yes, there will be some tough times to come between now and then, but as far as the nation of God, the people of God, don't worry. Jesus said, seek ye first God's kingdom and his righteousness. All your needs will be added. If you've got what you need today, don't worry about tomorrow. Now, these people ate manna. For 40 years, the Bible says, they ate manna. He kept providing. Now, I think probably there might have been some say, well, this manna's good. And I'm full. I'm not hungry, but I'm ready for a change. I think I'm going to plant some of them cucumber seeds I brought with me. And or I think I'm going to see if I can go catch me some fish in this pond I found over here. I think I could, I can't help believe some of that went on. So God's going to take, some people are always just needy. Some people they're just going to have help, and they're satisfied with that. But others, you can exercise a little, be proactive. You can have more than just manna. God will bless you. He'll help you. So with that, I'm saying, I'm not saying don't store up for a bad time. We learned that through the hurricane, right? You better have a little extra on hand. There's bad times are going to come from time to time. But don't substitute all that and alienate yourself from God and being his person and having faith in and following him. I want to wrap this up with what else Jesus said. And I'll close with these verses and then we'll have prayer. And that's going back to Matthew chapter 6. Just a few verses here. And leading up to when he made that comment about don't worry about tomorrow. He preceded it by saying, for this reason, in chapter 6 of Matthew, verses 25 and following, for this reason I say to you, don't be worried about your life as to what we'll eat or what we'll drink, nor for your body as to what you'll put on it. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothing? Look at the birds of the air. Do they plant seed? Do they go out and harvest the seed and bring crops into the barn? No. Your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not much more worthy than they? And why are you worried about clothing? Observe the lilies of the field. Look at the plants, the flowers outside, he said. He said, they just toil, they don't work, nor do they spend, they just there. He said, yet I say to you, Solomon in all his glory clothed himself like these. But if God clothes the grass of the field, which is alive today and tomorrow is thrown into the furnace, will he not clothe you, you of little faith? Don't worry then, saying, what shall we eat? Or what will we drink? Or what will we wear for clothing? This is the kind of things the Gentiles seek. That was the lost generation. For your heavenly Father knows that you need these things, but seek his kingdom first and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. So, If the news, the TV comes on and emergency broadcast system's got a new message on there and then the stocks fall and then the economy's a collapse here and this is happening. Don't matter. Don't worry about the TV news, worry about the good news, right? The good news. Let's stand together in prayer.